So your waist ratio is the smallest part of your waist. For mine, it is around 38 inches. And then for the hip ratio, it's the largest part of your hips. So for mine, it will be around 44. For anatomical position, you're standing upright with your feet about shoulder width apart. Your eyes are looking forward. Your arms are by your side with your palms facing forward and your fingers are together. So for superior, it means it's closer to the head. So in anatomical position, your elbow is superior to the wrist. And then in inferior, it means it's further from the head. So in anatomical position, your wrist is inferior to your elbow. Okay, so anterior means towards the front of the body. So for an example, it would be your kneecap. Your kneecaps are anterior because they are towards the front of the body. Okay, so posterior means towards the back of your body. So for an example, your calves are on the posterior side of your body. Medial means that it's towards the midline of your body. So an example of that would be your eyes are more medial than your ears. And in contrast to that, lateral means that it's away from the midline of your body. So your ears would be more lateral than your eyes. Okay, so proximal means that it's towards the point of origin of the body. So the shoulder is proximal to the elbow. And then in contrast, distal means that it's away from the point of origin of the body. So the elbow is distal to the shoulder. Okay, so superficial is being closer to the surface of the body. So an example of this would be that the pectoralis major is superficial to the ribs. And then in contrast to that, deep means that it's closer to the core of the body. So the ribs are deep to the pectoralis major. Okay, so the sagittal plane divides the body into left and right halves. So it would be right along right here. The frontal plane divides the body into anterior and posterior. And then the transverse plane, it runs along right about here and it divides the body into superior and inferior parts. The mediolateral axis passes horizontally side to side and then is perpendicular to the sagittal plane. The anterior-posterior axis, it runs horizontally front to back and it is perpendicular to the frontal plane. And then the supero-inferior axis passes up and down and it's perpendicular to the transverse plane. Okay, so the center of mass is the point that represents the average location of a system's mass. So all cardinal planes pass through this point, and gravitational pull is concentrated here. So in humans, it's around the sacral nerve, so about right here. Okay, so motions in the sagittal plane. You have flexion, which is bending the elbow. You have dorsiflexion. So dorsiflexion is when your toes are brought closer to your shin. So that would be dorsiflexion. And then you have plantar flexion. So this is when you point your foot like that. And then you have extension, which is straightening your arm. And then you have hyperextension, which is extension of the limb beyond the normal limits. So you can hyperextend your neck like that. So motions of the frontal plane include abduction, adduction, elevation of the scapula, depression of the scapula, eversion, inversion, deviation, and lateral flexion. Motions in the transverse plane include rotation to the left and rotation to the right. It includes includes internal rotation, external rotation, protraction of the shoulder, retraction of the shoulder, and then it includes pronation and supination. So motions in multiple planes include circumduction, and then you can have pronation of the ankle and supination of the ankle. Pronation, supination. So a closed skill is performed in a stationary environment. So you can choose when to start the skill, and you can redo the same skill over and over again. So an example of this would be throwing a baton. Open skill is performed in an unstable environment, so it depends on what's going on around you and what the environment is. So an example of this would be throwing and catching a tennis ball. Motion is simply just the process of changing a position, so such as raising my hand or moving my foot. Translation is moving from one place to another in which all the points are moving at the same time in the same direction. So an example of this would be walking forward. So rectilinear translation is motion along a straight line. So once again, walking forward in a straight line. And then curvilinear translation is motion along a curved line. So it could be walking forward but curved. Rotation is motion around a single axis. So an example of this would literally just be spinning around. Motion is a combination of translation and rotation. So this is pretty much all human motion in general. So it includes walking and running and skipping. A discrete skill is a single unit of activity. It has a beginning and stopping point. So an example of this would be jumping. A continuous skill is a skill that has no well-defined beginning or end. So an example of this would be skipping. Serial skills appear to be continuous, but really they are just combinations of discrete movements. So an example of this would be throwing a ball up and down. Simple kinetic chain is segments that have no more than two linkages. So an example of this would be your legs, as they are only attached to your ankles and your hips. Okay, so a complex kinetic chain is a segment that is connected to more than two other segments. So an example would be your hand, because it's connected to 5 fingers, and then your wrist. A closed kinetic chain is when the most distal part is stationary. So an example of this is a squat. So your feet are stationary, they're fixed, they don't move. So this would be a closed kinetic chain. An open kinetic chain is when the most distal part of your body is free to move. So an example of this would be a lat pull down. Your hand's the most distal part. So it moves around your body during the exercise. It's not fixed. So this would be an example.